The bell that rings to a sermon calls not upon the preacher only, but upon the congregation to come. So this bell calls us all. They're played at the beginning of a service, and then sort of to call people to the cathedral, to call people to worship.
I think for a lot of people, it's the first indication that you're getting close to Grace Cathedral.
Even before you walk in through the doors of Grace and the effect of the building on you, I feel like the bells are having a visceral effect on people as they come to church.
It's amazing how when the bells start, people will stop and listen. It has that effect.
The call to worship in particular helps worshipers transition from being out in the world to the peaceful, contemplative experience of a worship service.
It has a liturgical purpose. It calls people into the church to quiet their souls and listen to the organ prelude. This is a time of something different from the daily routines.
The sound of the bells before the 11 o'clock Eucharist, for example, I love, because it's a sort of welcoming everyone to church.
We play something on the bells, and that signifies, okay, people, let's gather, let's worship.
The carillon is very much an external instrument, and the 44 bells hang in the bell tower, and when they're rung, their sound is meant to go out, and it's go out to project to the community.
People in the park, people walking by, listen to the bells and sort of feel, oh, that's great that we have this, and they really appreciate the tradition, I think.
The church has a presence. Whether or not you're going into it, it's part of the fabric. It's part of its environment.
That lies behind the passion of all bell ringers, is that they are talking to a wide audience with the bells. And it's not like the town crier. You're calling people with music. You want to entertain them so that the message gets through to come. Come to church. Come and hear music in church you would never hear anywhere else, and where you will be treated like a child of God.
You've got Grace Cathedral, and you've got Huntington Park, and you've got all the surrounding, buildings and homes and associations and that type of thing. And so from Grace Cathedral, which is such a prominent architectural feature of Nob Hill, that having the bells sound, each person will hear it and give their own meaning to it. But I think as everyone hearing it, and it focuses their attention on, oh, I'm here at Nob Hill. This is part of the sensory experience of not just your vision, but you hear the bells.
Because the large bell will be heard 4 blocks away or more, and the small bells will maybe be heard a half a block or a block away. So you have to combine these to include who's ever in the neighborhood. Many times people who hear our bells are relaxing or walking their pets in the Huntington Park across the street, and they will sit down and listen.
Because if you can hear the bells ringing throughout the neighborhood.
And it's hard to imagine a larger music expression than bells, which are heard for blocks and heard by all and sundry. So I think the bells and their role in music, in the life of the cathedral, and music as an expression of worship, as an opportunity for spirituality, but also just sheerly for the beauty of the music itself. That's really where the bells live.
It's the mystery of the toning of the bells that goes deep into the heart, into the soul of a person.
It's actually kind of an emotional anchor in the community.
It's a much more complicated and much more generous vision than many people realize.
At noon and at 6, we ring the Angelus, and that gives people a chance to pause from their work, and if they don't know the prayer, at least to just say, oh, there's a special bell ringing. It's time to give thanks. It's time to just pause and take account. They ring in 3 groups of 3, usually for the 3 verses and responses and the Hail Mary prayer. So that happens 3 times. And then the bell tolls several times while the final collect, the final prayer, describes what we're praying.
The angel of the Lord brought tidings to Mary.
And she conceived by the Holy Ghost.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
The Chinese use brass bells, and some of us know about the gamelan, which is a generic name for all kinds of instruments. But among them are these frames that have small bells on them, and they're used for ritual, and they're used at parties, like wedding parties and so on. The gamelan is played. They were very early used to ward off evil spirits.
So bells have been known in many, many different countries and places, and at the Far East, the Middle East, everywhere there were little handbells. And then the large cast bells came into view in like 571 AD, 600 AD, and the first really known tuned carillon bells of 23 bells were developed, and so they were tuned. There was a special tuning for them. So the carillons became a big favor in the late 1600s.
You know, bells were very important for very practical reasons in history, and they still provide the same function today. Being here with my colleagues, the bell strikes 2 and you know it's 2 o'clock.
The patron saint of bell ringers is St. Dunstan, Archbishop of Canterbury, who's died towards the end of the 10th century. In Grace Cathedral there is a window that shows St. Dunstan with a string of small bells across his breast. There was a young boy who was born in Penzance, England in the 1850s, named Nathaniel Thomas Coulson. And because he was so poor, he was put in a workhouse. When he was a teenager or older, he joined the British Navy and visited San Francisco and went to college and became a dentist. He gave Grace Cathedral the singing tower, which is the North Tower, and 44 tuned bells. And lived to see them dedicated in 1953.
And I often think about him when I play the bells, how far-sighted that was to donate something that enormous, and it's still making a noise.
So that if you see old photographs of the cathedral, you'll see that this part is finished, then you'll see this empty space, and then you'll see the tower where the carillon bells were. So they built the tower and they put the bells in the tower, and then when Alfred Hitchcock filmed Vertigo, the cathedral wasn't finished. The second tower wasn't there. So what he did was he took a photograph of the first tower and inverted the photograph so that it looked like Grace Cathedral had 2 towers, even though it didn't, because that movie's from the 50s and the cathedral wasn't finished until the early 60s.
We play what's called a change before the service, which is from the English church tradition of change ringing, where you have a set number of bells, and the bells are rung not in the melody, but they're rung in every possible mathematic combination that there can be. So if you had 6 bells, it would be, bells 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and bells 1, 3, 2, 4, 5, 6, and that type of thing. And if you ring a complete change, you've rung every possible mathematic combination of that set number of bells.
So you'll have, say, a tower of a belfry with 6 bells, or 8 bells, or 7 bells, or 5 bells, and there's different methods. And the methods are patterns. And the patterns are not tunes. The patterns are a list of numbers. And each bell has a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it will be something like, first of all, bell 1 plays, and then bell 6 plays, and then bell 3 plays.
And most people have heard a change before, they just didn't know what it was. Most people who have a clock that has a chime with it will have the Westminster chime, which is 4 notes. So you can bum 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 bum. Those are 4 notes in 4 different combinations, and that's the Westminster chime. That's a change.
And as a child, I remember kind of trying to work out what they were playing. What is this tune? Why does it keep going? No, now it's different. Oh, now it's kind of this. And I couldn't work out what it was. And it wasn't until I came to Grace, and it was only really then that I kind of went back to me when I was 12 and went, oh, that's what's going on.
Now, I personally love the sound of the bells being played in a change. The patterns and the fact that you're hearing this beautiful sound, and at some level, the brain is aware that there's a pattern. Not right up here, but you know that this isn't just chaos, this isn't just random. The pattern may or may not be revealed, but that concept of the bells being organized so that you're hearing them in a methodical playing out of a permutation of numbers that translate into the actual sounds, I think it's just marvelous.
And it comes from a practical issue that you have with enormous bells that you're pulling on ropes to make a sound. It takes a while for the bell to get back into position, ready to play again. So you can't just ring on one bell, you can't just play a tune with ease. The carillon is slightly different, but with traditional bells that are hanging in a belfry, they swing round and then they have to return to position again. They're not really composed anymore. These are patterns that somebody created them in the past. They've got all sorts of strange names like grandsire triples we play, and plain bob major. But when it says triples or major or minor, that is referring to how many notes you're using. How many notes, which originally would have been how many bells that particular church had.
Our bells are made of bronze. 78% copper, 22% tin, which gives them a sweet tone. The tuning of our bells gives us 5 noticeable tones that anybody who listens carefully will hear. You will hear a strike tone. You will hear an octave below, which is called the hum tone. And you will hear an octave above, a terce, which is a minor third, and a fifth. From Dr. Coulson, we have 44 tuned bells in a cage. The cage fills from the upper space in the North Tower.
The carillon at Grace Cathedral has been, it's electronic. It has been electrified, and it has been ever since it was installed in the cathedral.
You know, carillons often will be played with mallets, and the player depresses the mallets, and that's what makes the bells sound.
The movement of that baton connects to the wire that connects to the bell, and it sounds, and so it's a very direct mechanical connection.
Here we actually have a keyboard that is attached, so anyone who plays piano or plays a keyboard instrument could technically play our carillon.
And it's instantaneous also, so you play with your fingers much as you would play a piano, and the electric impulses, you know, through the wires, not through the mechanical connection, go up there and activate the hammer, which then strikes the bell.
It's cheating if it's a keyboard. They've got to be ropes and people have got to pull them.
I've always loved church music. Liturgical music is really something that I grew up with. I was a chorister and have always loved it. And I always heard the bells, and I thought, gee, I wonder who plays those. I feel honored. I mean, Grace Cathedral has such a reputation for beautiful liturgical music. Music is such an important part of the worship at Grace Cathedral, and we have such talented musicians, you know, the organists, the choristers, the men, the camerata, the level of artists who are invited into Cathedral. And it's, to me, to be even loosely associated with that group playing the bells is such a privilege.
Some members of the Carillon Guild really, really like playing, especially the freeform after the 11 o'clock service, melodies of the hymns that were in that day's service. That didn't interest me that much. I thought this is an opportunity to play music that's specifically written for the Carillon, or to find other music that works on the Carillon. When I first started playing and just kind of experimenting and trying to get a sense of what is this instrument, I would improvise. And so to be able to play kind of a flourish of bells, especially the high silvery bells, that just has this marvelous, joyful sound. Not music per se, not a melody, but just the bells participating in the experience of the life of the community.
I love the keyboard, and the transfer to the bells is actually easy, but it does take some getting accustomed to. If your piano or your organ is in tune, then you hear it in a small space, and the high notes on a piano and the low notes will go together. They're about the same volume. It's altogether a different story with the bells, because the big bells are going to be heard much further, and the small bells will be, you're lucky if you can hear them a block away. If you play, say, America, you're going to put the tune America in much larger bell, and you're going to put the accompaniment in small bells, because the tune is what you want to convey. You will not have as many notes either to worry about, but the delicacy of the accompaniment is part of the challenge. Not everything works. When you try something, you will know when you hear it whether it's going to work or not, because many times that minor third gets in the way. But that's the challenge, because many more pieces that are familiar to people, and many new things which are unfamiliar, you can adapt, and we all look forward to this kind of an expanded ministry.
The bells have a humbling effect because they are so kind of idiosyncratic. You know, you'll be playing this piece that sounds great on the piano, and then all of a sudden, because they have these strange overtones, and some of the bells are really loud and some of the bells take a little while to actually sound, you'll be playing something that you think is going to work well, and you're looking forward to playing it, and you think it's, and then all of a sudden you'll play this note which sounded really juicy and really nice, and it will just sound so awful. And it kind of checks you. It kind of makes you realize that you're not necessarily going to know what they sound like. When I started playing the carillon, I was still feeling like this is a performance, people will be listening to me. And then sometimes I go, oh, I wonder if, you know, if I played something well, I wonder if anyone knows that was me. And that would be creeping in. And you have to kind of switch off that part of you that might still want some kind of approbation, some kind of like praise. And it becomes, it's great the way that unpredictable element of them helps to work on it being an offering rather than a performance, and for the glory of something. For removing the performance, for removing the ego, for when I think about all of these composers who composed for the glory of God and who composed for the church, I feel like when you play the carillon and nobody knows that you're there, you're able to kind of get more into that mode, into that way of being.
The passion of our bell ringers is seated in the deep understanding that this is ministry. It's part of the calling.
Or I try to remind myself of Johann Sebastian Bach in the volumes of music that he composed and wrote. Whenever he started writing down a piece of music, the first thing he wrote was Solo Deo Gloria on the top of it. To God alone be the glory. And so whatever small part that I can contribute to that end is a real honor for me.
In many places, bells have a particular, purpose. So that, they're ringing these bells, it means this and that. So it calls people to worship, it punctuates time, it helps people to slow down. So you have it before a service, you have it when there's a funeral or a wedding.
There are special services during the year. We're able to play the call to worship before, say, the Advent lessons and carols on Christmas Eve. And that's actually one of my favorite ones.
They light all the Christmas trees, and you sit up there at the Carillon console and you wait for a signal. And the moment that they turn the lights on, you play Christmas carols for 5 or 10 minutes. So I know that it really means a lot, to everyone in the community.
Tony Bennett was invited to come to the city. Of course, one of his major claims to fame was his connection with singing I Left My Heart in San Francisco. And there was a statue unveiled on the lawn of the Fairmont. There was a ceremony on the lawn. The Carillon was requested to be added into the mix to play I Left My Heart in San Francisco at the conclusion of the ceremony.
So that's another really great, connection about how these bells are important to the neighborhood.
I am playing next week for the Service of Remembrance for the British Legion. And that is a special service that is very old at Grace Cathedral. I will play a call to worship, which is a new call to worship for us. It's called Grands or Triples, which means we're playing with 7 bells. Normally we're playing with 6 bells. And after the service, I will play America. For the Brits, that's the same tune as God Save the Queen.
That service has bagpipes and wonderful, wonderful music as a part of the service.
I've played a lot of weddings here, and a lot of them are not complete without the carillon ringing. Scales, the changes, usually happy scales going up and down. To have the bells ring throughout the neighborhood, sharing this incredible moment in your life of, joy with everyone that can hear it. And of course, the same thing with tragic situations. When there's been a significant shooting and there is an unnamed pain, that you don't necessarily go to your next door neighbor's house and talk about a tragedy. But when the bells toll, it's a way of the entire neighborhood mourning together. Of course, it's a very important emotional anchor as well. It sort of is, it speaks to our collective feelings at a moment.
When there was a solemn occasion, when the tragedy of 9/11, and we have 14,000 people pass through the cathedral, we rang that bell that tolled it for the dead.
So I think the bells are incredibly important, and like so many really important things, or the most important things, we aren't aware of how important they are.
The Carillon's one of my favorite things about Grace Cathedral. It has such a way of lifting up the spirits of everyone in the community and in the city. There's so often at times when I'm walking across Huntington Park or coming from the Fairmont, and I'll hear the bells ringing, and it just lifts my spirits. So I'm really grateful for them, and I enjoy hearing them when I'm in the church too. There's something about them that just takes that joy that you already feel and magnifies it.
It's a way of shaping life in such a way that we are more reflective and perhaps more sensitive to one another.